Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Schmidt, by the way. We're here along with Ian Sanchez, my crack producer. Thank you for joining us for episode number, Ian, what is it?
I think we're on 82 now. Yep.
82, episode 82. We love it. We love bringing you these episodes, and we also love the interactions that you guys bring us. So I think we got this off of one of the social platforms this week, and it's timely, so we're going to talk about it. It's this time of year. We're approaching Halloween, and the buck activity, if you look at the whitetail rut predictions, they're right on money this year. The seeking, chasing, the whole phase of what we're calling the rut basically started this week. We've seen it across the country. Noah Rux here just killed a monster yesterday, 165-inch buck, perfect 10. We had the opportunity to go help him recover that yesterday. David Gillane shot one in the morning, a big 8-pointer. The bucks are moving. And that's the topic for today. I'm going solo about this time of year, your hunting tactics. You know, how should you be approaching things? And does a buck's core area matter? We're saying it doesn't matter. Actually, it does matter, because the more you know about a buck's core area and his home range, the better you are going to be prepared when you're hunting this time of year. But the theme you're going to hear me talk about today a lot is you have to be flexible at this time of the year. Now, if everything has gone right for you, you've prepared, you've had your stands hung, your rut stands that you haven't hunted yet, and you're ready to go. If you haven't, all hope is not lost, because actually, Ian, some of the best bucks I ever killed were on the fly this time of year, late October, early November. That was based off of what I knew about the deer behavior in that area. So the things I want to talk about, who's this going to apply to? If you hunt private land, public land, it's going to apply to both. But for my experience that I'm giving here, most of the hunting that I've done on my own has been either on public or private adjacent to public in my career. I mean, I've hunted since 1983 was my first deer season, and most of it was on public land for the first 20 years. And then as I moved into central part of Wisconsin, where we're located, we've been located forever, a lot of small parcels. I'm not privileged to own a big chunk of land, and I've hunted a lot of small parcels of land adjacent to public, and that's how I learned how to hunt these deer. So what I'm going to talk about is, what do you do right now? What should you know? You know, this isn't about the guy who has one tree stand and goes out and hunted. I'm not going to be able to help you. If that's the way you're hunting, God bless you, more power to you. You're going to probably have a leg up on that land because you know it. This is for the guys and gals who you might not know the land as well, or very well, or you might have trouble deciding what you should do. So when I talk about deer behavior, that's where it all starts and ends with hunting any deer, especially buck, during the rut. For me, let's talk about the core areas first. Core areas, what is a buck's core area? Is it a magical spot? Not really. It's basically where he's safe. There's good cover. It's adjacent to food, and he doesn't get pressured, okay? And that exists anywhere you hunt, even on public land. How do you identify it? The biggest thing that you can do is obviously let the deer show you how to hunt them, and that means getting away from the food sources. Now, if you have food plots and they're working for you, again, more power to you, that's great. Let's face it, the preponderance of guys don't have that. You know, you might have a food plot, and most guys overestimate how much food they have. This time of year, yes, you want to hunt doe groups, but I try to stay off of the food areas in the spots that I hunt that are highly pressured, because unless that doe is going, you know, and when she is entering estrus, she's not going to be sitting out there feeding anyways. She's going to be going back into the cover, back into that security cover in between. I'm getting to my point. I know it took a couple minutes. In between some of those really solid bedding areas, the feeding areas, and the travel corridors in between. So what I do is, if you know a buck's core area, I'm going to give you a couple examples here, a couple of the biggest bucks I've ever killed. their core areas were in cedar swamps, and those cedar swamps were adjacent to farmland. Now up here we have farmland of soybeans and corn, alfalfa, you name it, clover. There's all sorts of good food sources, but I never killed a buck over those, and I never killed a big buck over a food plot back in the day. What I would do is I would center off of those swamps, which were cedar swamps, some tamaracks, the thicker aspen cutovers, big tooth aspen, people call it poplar, that led to hardwood ridges. And those hardwood ridges on most public lands, they're vast seas of nothingness. There's no understory because they have been overbrowsed for years. But they're good travel corridors. Forget about acorns. Even though we have a synchronized mast this year, I could go off on a tangent on that, and I will in a minute. Get off of the acorns, because if they're starting to move, they're starting to seek, that buck's going from point A to point B. So what I do is I focus on the doe groups, number one. Where are those doe groups feeding? If they're in the acorns, okay, well then I might be focusing on that. But if they're on the farm crops or the food plots, what I'm doing is I'm getting as close to that core area bedding areas. And just let's forget about the whole term core area. Let's talk about bedding areas. I'm getting as close to those bedding areas, because if you get close to the bedding areas, you're going to find what you've read about from John Eberhart, what you've read about from Steve Bartilla and Gary Clancy and some of the greatest hunters that we've ever published in deer and deer hunting, the staging areas. And the staging areas are those clusters of cover where you're going to find the scrapes, where you're going to find the rubs in number. And usually you can connect the dots. Greg Miller made a living on this as far as rub lines go. You connect the dots. You don't just look for the sign, oh my gosh, here's a scrape, I'm going to hammer stand up here. No. Here's a scrape. Define it however you want. There's a lot of guys out there on the internet that want to tell you this is a primary scrape, this is a communal scrape. I honestly don't care what you want to call it. I'm looking for clusters of sign. Rubs are basically just like you dropped a Kleenex on the sidewalk. Oh, there he was here, and he was over there, and he was over there. And now I'm looking, that's a tertiary trail that's going to that oak motte, or that's going to that food plot, or that cornfield. Know where I'm coming at? The scrapes are bigger, better sign, because the buck's spending more time there. Steve says it all the time. You want to have a buck spend a disproportionate amount of time, and that's where you want to be, where he's spending that time. Those scrapes are leading into those same areas. And that's what it should be telling me especially when I hunted the public lands, the Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin, a Dead Sea. If you can go up there and kill a branch antlered buck, I'll give you a blue ribbon, because it's very hard. Same thing with the Nicolet National Forest. But that's what I looked for. I looked for that type of sign. And then I say it all the time, the bird's eye view, zoom myself up, like if I'm a little drone, get above the woods, and now what is this sign telling me? How is the buck using this property? And that's how I did it. Now, again, most of my hunting, some of the best hunting I ever did was a 60-acre lease that I had. The land wasn't that great, but it was next to a big cedar swamp. And what I would do is I'd stay off of the food, and I'd get as close to that cedar swamp as possible. That's what's putting me in the ballpark this time of year, because I know those bucks are going to be in that. If they get a doe, they're going to try to chase them back into that thicker cover, where they can, fend off other bucks and all that good stuff. But also, that's where they're going to spend most of their time. When they're coming out of there, I want to intercept him at some point during the day. This is the time of year, if you can hack it, that you're hunting all day, and it's also being extremely smart about how you're accessing it. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Full Range Mounting Systems. These mounting systems are a great way to manage all of your mounts in a stylish and organized manner. We are using their pedestal mount here on the podcast set for 2 shoulder mounts, and it looks just awesome. Be sure to check out their mounting systems at fullrangesystems.com, and for 15% off your order, use code DTN. So if you're following me along so far, in between thick cover, quote unquote bedding areas, and food. Some guys will write in the comments, and please do. I kill all my bucks on food. I kill all my bucks off of small food plots in the woods. Awesome. Those, I'm not saying they're not bad ideas. They're good ideas if you have that situation. I'm just giving you an idea if you don't know where to start. Okay, the biggest thing is closest to the bedding area as possible, or in that staging area. The bedding area is the thick stuff. I try not to get in there unless I can get in there stealthily and not bust stuff out of there, and that's really, really tough. So I always try to stay on the outskirts, err on the side of caution. Always play the wind. I don't care what kind of scent approach you have. I have it's the Gary Clancy, all things. My release, my gloves, my boots, everything gets scent killer. I wash it. Everything gets treated, but I just don't blunder in there, youthfully arrogant, thinking that, well, I took care of all my stuff, so I should be scent free. But there's a south wind today, and it's blowing straight into the bedding area. Well, guess what? At the end of the day, I didn't see anything. There's no deer around here. No, it's not that you didn't see anything. You didn't pay attention to the wind. You have to do that.
Another note also, if I may add, on paying attention to the wind, be careful where you leave your scent as you were going through the woods. Be careful think about the time of day that you are going through the woods, and at what time of the day are you putting that scent in a particular spot that might be later throughout the day.
Are you talking about your scent, or are you talking about like Esther's scent?
Well, I'm talking about our scent. Our human scent. Be careful about, like you said, don't just go traipsing through the woods, without thinking about where the deer might be moving, if they're going to pick up, that scent that you may have left.
Exactly. I would step over. That's a good point, Ian. So if you do hunt in areas, and I know some people do in the South, not so much. This is mostly for northern hunters. You go through a woods, especially a public woods, and it's got a lot of deer on it. You see those well-worn deer trails. This might sound rudimentary, but step over the top of that. You're like walking on eggshells to get back to your spot.
Right.
You got to keep that in mind. But as far as predominant winds, we've had a terrible time with southerly winds here because of it's warmer and it's tough. So you have to have options. If you can hunt out of a saddle, or if you can hunt out of a climber. I've killed a lot of bucks with a climbing tree stand back in the day. They're very versatile, and you can actually get into spots where the wind isn't perfect, but get on the opposite side. So like what I've done in some ridge situations with, they were mostly red maple and red oak woodlots, was a south wind was terrible, but I knew exactly how the deer were getting into that bedding area. So what I would do is I'd still walk through there, but I'd get on the opposite side of the predominant trails where I think, or I should say not trails, the predominant crossings where those deer got back in there. So instead of hunting them like, let's just say the direction is this way, I'm turning around and facing that way. That can work. But better than that is have backup plans for that property. Like if it's a north wind, I'm going to be hunting this spot. If it's a south wind, I'm going to be hunting this spot. And you could be talking about, like I said, a big public woods that's several hundred acres, if not thousands, or it could be a small woodlot, like a 10-acre woodlot, where it's like I can't hunt anywhere close to that food plot because the wind is wrong. And some guys say, well, that doesn't matter. It does matter. If you're hunting mature bucks, it matters. And when I say mature bucks, okay, that is a relative thing because it depends upon where you're hunting. Mature buck on public land is 2.5 years old. Sorry, that's what it is, because you're not going to see many 3.5-year-olds or anything older than that. If you're hunting private land, a lot of guys, well, I don't hunt them until they're 5.5 years old. Yes, that's a mature buck there. And that buck is I shouldn't say he's much smarter. He's tough to kill. He's tough to kill as on public land. You videotaped me. We've had fawns and yearlings coming out of their skin.
Oh, yeah.
And not even smelling us. John Eberhardt has some of the best video on this. I know I'm going on a rabbit hole here, but best video of in Michigan, a yearling buck is as smart as any 5.5-year-old buck in Iowa because those things are getting hunted hard. I digress. Getting into those spots on the right wind, okay? That's key. But I should back up, and the number one key is your entry and exit routes to those stands. Do not fall into the trap of easiest way to get in there. You're running late, you want to get in there, so you're going to take the quickest route there, and if you bust a deer, this time of year might not matter. You might have a buck come through there at 9, 10, 11 o'clock if you're staying all day. So, that there's something to be said about that too. The guy who can hunt all day has a leg up on, it might not matter as much, but the way I do it is something that John Eberhardt taught me 20 plus years ago.
Do they move earlier, like throughout the day during the rut, or do they move like later throughout the day? Like, is there a different time of day that they're moving, or is it just kind of sporadic at its own will?
I find they move all the time. They're moving all the time.
Okay.
Like when this time comes and the bucks are seeking, they're moving at all times of the day. So what I do is, and I know I've talked about this on the podcast before, is I get into my spot 90 minutes before first light, hour and a half, on pressured deer. And the reason I do this is, and like I said, the guys out there who are going to be criticizing this say, why are you in your stand an hour and a half before first light? The reason is if I come in there, let's just say 10 or 15 minutes before first light, and I bust a deer, the odds of me seeing that deer for the rest of the day are pretty small. Not saying that I will never see him. They're pretty small if I busted him. He knows something was in there, and there's going to be some type of memory capability on the deer, especially if you smelled, you forget about it on an older buck. Okay, so I didn't bust him coming in. Well, how does that help me? Because maybe that buck got in there. Maybe I got in that stand before he came through. He comes through and it's still dark out. He passes through. How many times has this happened to you? You hear this buck grunting in the dark. Like, oh man, I wish I could see that I could get it. And he comes past, but guess what? Lo and behold, 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30, that buck comes back through. And we've had this happen time and time again when the early bird gets the worm, and the fact that I got out there early enough, I got in the stand, didn't bust anything. Now, I'm not going to do this in September. I'm going to be doing it at this time of year when there's a really high probability that buck is basically on his feet all day long cruising. And if you've got a spot where there are some does, I'd highly recommend, I'm a doe killing fool, but I'd highly recommend against killing does right the next 2 weeks. In the fact that if you have a doe come in, there's going to be bucks all over that property. And so anyways, my entry route, taking wind into consideration, getting in there early, hunting as physically long as I could possibly handle. For me, getting older, that's about 4 hours max. You young bucks can stay out there all day. God bless you. I used to be able to do that. I can't anymore. I can't. I can't take it anymore. Hunt as long as you possibly can. And, okay, so let's say you're a guy like me and you can only hunt 4 hours. Should you get in there an hour and a half? No, then don't. Unless you just want to make the maximum amount of opportunity for those first 3 hours of the day. But if you just say, I want the best 4 hours, what's the best 4 hours? For me, then it would be midday. It would be from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock this time of year. As we get to Halloween and past, Midwest and North, if you're a southern hunter in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, you're not going to be doing that right now. You're going to be doing that in December and January, especially our Alabama friends. I know those guys are down there in January having just fabulous hunting. So it depends upon where you are in the country. But I'm just talking, Dixie line and north, depending upon where you're at, when your bucks really go. To me, that late morning is pretty darn good. At 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning is pretty darn good. Early afternoon is pretty darn good. It seems to me, and you guys chime in on this, but it seems to me where we hunt, those really late afternoon hunts, it just seems like those bucks, I'm not saying bucks aren't getting killed, but it's not like it was early season. Yes, there's still out there activity happening, but for the most part, mornings is where it's at right now, even if you have a spot that normally isn't a morning spot. It just seems some of those deer were out all evening. feeding, and now those bucks are cruising. And some of those bucks just, like I said, never stop. Okay, Ian, interject while I try to.
Yeah, what I'm gonna chime in here to summarize sort of what you're all saying. It kind of sounds like what we can do as hunters is just take a collection of different tactics and techniques that don't necessarily guarantee success, but just add like little percentages to the overall, like, how good are we doing here? How well are we staying hidden? How well are we hunting these deer?
It's an excellent point, because what I would encourage anybody, what Ian just said, is add something to your approach. If it's not working, try something else. Try, bring a grunt call with you. Try a little light rattling. This time of year, there's no wrong answer. There's not saying, oh, never rattle or never grunt. You just never know. Scent usage is great this time of year. It really is, especially on some of those areas with wrong winds. Excuse me. What I'll try to do is hunt a crosswind. So let's just say a south wind is really bad for me. And if I'm hunting and I'm portable with a climber, in my case, a tree saddle for some of you young guys that have used them. David used one the other day. And let's use his for example. You guys hunted that deer, right?
Yeah.
So David shoots this really beautiful 8-pointer, just a solid buck, 200-pound deer. And you guys had that buck coming out into a field, hunted him how many times?
I think we had only seen him the one day that we had hunted.
One day,
yeah.
But he kept coming, and David's seen him several times,
Right.
coming out of that field, but on the far end.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, now what? You guys are hunting in a nice fixed position spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then what he did is he got himself into his saddle, went on the opposite side and found the only tree he could get up in. He was on private land, basically across the road from thousands of acres of public land. Got up there, and he got that buck coming out. Now, I would say that was a rare scenario of where you got that deer still. He was starting to nose doze around a little bit, but he was just coming out of that feeding pattern that we've had for the past, month.
Yeah.
We had, and I'm sure anybody listened to this, if you haven't, again, let us know, but the acorn crop this year, so if you guys don't know what a synchronized mast is among oaks, please Google it, because it's the most, or actually pick up the next issue of Deer and Deer Hunting, because it's the November issue. It's out right now. Josh Honeycutt wrote a story on masting in oaks. So this is cyber I have to go off on. So masting in oaks, which means a bumper crop of acorns, mostly red oak species. White oaks are thrown in there, but happens about once every 7 years. So that's kind of serendipitous, isn't it? 7 years. If you look in the Bible,
right.
Everything's off at 7 years. So 7 year is about the average masting for oaks in North America. Once every 50 to 100 years, there's a thing called synchronized masting. Now, if you don't believe in God, this might change your mind, because nature, every 50 to 100 years, has what's called a synchronized mast. And why this happens, scientists do not know. But so let me back up. On a mast year, once every 7 years, the average oak will produce 1,000 acorns. On a synchronized mast year, the average oak might produce up to 10,000 acorns.
Oh my gosh.
And that's what we have this year in North America. That's why you're seeing pictures on Facebook and Instagram of just like carpet of acorns in people's yards.
Yeah.
And you've heard me complain because I haven't been seeing any deer. I've sat 16 sits. You sat with me a couple times. I saw a deer twice.
Yep.
But I have a small property with food plots, but we're adjacent to hardwood forests.
Right.
Where all those acorns are. I was like, that's all they're eating? I don't know. But where was I going with this? Even in a synchronized mast year, those bucks are going to shift from getting fat off of acorns to looking for does right now. I mean, it's basically starting right now. Where do you find them? In those transition zones. And I know we didn't talk about the core areas much because I can't really sit there and sit down and, if you guys know what a good core area is, our intensive land manager guys do, but it's hard to tell you in 45 minutes if I was just talking about that you know, it depends. It varies from property to property, but the behavior is the same. If you have good security cover adjacent to something where that's attracting does, right in between. That's where I want to be right now. I actually want to be there right now. I want to be up there with my bow this minute if I could, because I know that even we got rain in the forecast every single day this week. I'd have my Gore-Tex on. I'd be sitting there. I'd be getting soaked. And we could talk about bow hunting in the rain. Should you do it or shouldn't you do it? Basically, for me, it is simply an exercise in help me with the word here, Ian. For me, bow hunting in the rain is an exercise of patience and keeping myself within my bounds, meaning that I'm not taking a 50-yard shot at a deer. I'm not taking a 30-yard shot at a deer unless I have a really good slam dunk hanging from the rim. I know that arrow's money. So for me, I scale it back. If I get up there and it's raining, I'm like, this might be a good show. I might be seeing deer, but I'm not shooting him unless he's right there quartering away and I'm drilling him. Because
guarantee a lot of blood.
Right, because I do not want to take the chance of wounding. I know a lot of people don't think that way. They think like, well, you know, where there's carbon, there's hope, or where there's aluminum, or where there's carbon wrapped aluminum with an FMJ, there's hope. I'm not doing that. But during the rut, some of the best hunting I've ever had was during a misty, cold, light, rainy day. And you're going to see activity. It's just staying within your means to make that shot happen.
While we're on the subject, I'm sorry to interject here, but while we're on the subject of weather, we're having an unusually warm winter. It's October as we're recording this. It's October 24th, I think, 24th.
Yep.
And it's like 50, 60 degrees out right now, raining.
Yeah.
And
it's going to change next week.
We're in central Wisconsin, so I mean, for anyone else, anywhere else in
I know our friends down in Missouri, Illinois, it's been unseasonably warm. Well,
right.
Their cold weather usually doesn't set in until November, but right. And I don't know if you've read anything on Weather Channel, but it's we're looking at another El Nino here, where it's going to be a higher than average temperatures. So where are you going with? I know where you're going with that. I'm going to let you ask.
Yep. Yeah. So one, how does that affect us hunters? How is that going to affect the deer movement? Is the biggest one. That's the biggest focus, but a little smaller focus off of that too that I think we should touch on is what can we do about it?
Good questions.
What can we do with the cards that we've been dealt?
Good questions. How does it affect us hunters? It affects our minds because we think that, this is shutting down deer activity. No, it's not. How does it affect deer? Will they move more in the dark? Maybe, possibly, depends. The biggest key here, which is hard to get a handle on, I'm going to go on record and say it does not affect deer activity. Because if you know the land the way you should know the land, or the way you aspire to know the land, those deer are moving just as much during the day than they are normally, but it could be into a much tighter concentric circle. And that's where knowing where those preferred bedding areas are, knowing where those bucks are hanging out, because he might chase that doe back in there, and instead of running all over God's green earth, she might just be going from brush pile to brush pile to brush pile until she's ready to breed. Or if she's not close, she might stick to that swamp. It does affect the deer in the fact they're probably not going to roam as far, but they're still moving. So if you have your stand in a prime travel location, you're still going to see deer. The other part to your question was
just with the hot weather. Let's focus on certain states. Like I know Missouri, they have warm weather. I know that it's going to be unusually warm this year, but for people like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, North and South Dakota,
Pennsylvania, New York,
right, like the eastern states,
Tennessee,
too, Ohio,
Kentucky,
Indiana.
It's warm weather, but the problem that we have for most of us, right? So 90% of us hunters, I mean, when we look at social media, we think everybody, and now these are my friends, but everybody is like Lee Lakosky or Pat Reeve or Don Kiske or somebody with 500 acres at their disposal. No, most of us have a small property, so we don't see the deer activity because we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 acres. And so how is it affecting those guys in those warmer states? Yeah, the deer, okay, so this is potato. The deer aren't going from property to property, but they're still moving. So,
does this change the time of day that we hunt? Does this?
No. I'm still hunting mornings.
Right.
Mornings are my go-to. Okay, so basically, if you can't hunt all day, which most of us can't, most of us have to work, even us. I'm hunting mornings, number one, because it's cooler, and it is gonna affect. On that small property hunter, my odds are going to be higher if I'm hunting at the cooler time of the day. Does that mean that their deer aren't going to be moving that there in the middle of the day? No, because I've got cutty back photos back home that are showing me activity. I mean, it was 60 degrees on Saturday. I did have deer coming through at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the middle of the day. How should it affect, or how should you adjust your strategy? If it's super warm, yeah, I guess limit it. If you can limit it, or I should say, if you have to limit it to the fringe hours of the day if you can. But most guys are taking off anyways. So if you're taking off for vacation, you're hunting. The weather is overblown, I think. Even when it gets super hot, it is a mental thing with hunters that you just take care of yourself and just know your property better so you can kind of weed through some of the chafe as far as the unproductive spots. I know I kind of talked in circles there, but
no, that completely answers it. And it answers it, and it also eliminates part of the question because, like you say, whether if it's not that big of a factor, then there's not much any good hunter can do to change it, affect it, or influence it, or move around it.
One thing I would add to that is if you do have does coming to food, like food plots, that might be a better spot to be closer to the transition areas. What I mean by that is find the trails or corridors that they're using to get to those food plots and hunt those closer to the food plots as opposed to closer to the bedding areas. That might help you out. The other thing that I would recommend, if you're in a state, I know some states still allow baiting, I would not put my money on hunting over bait this time of year. Those deer know the game. Even if a buck is lovesick, he knows that food, if he's an older deer, he knows that food is associated with danger. And it's just, it is a tough road to go. And if you do hunt in an area where baiting is legal, what I would suggest is hunting off of those bait stations to the trails leading to them, because then you're going to see, especially in the warmer weather, then you're going to see more activity during daylight as opposed to being in that stand. It gets dark, you have deer coming in, now you got to sit there for who knows. And that's the other another excellent point is if you're hunting near food, do not get out of that stand if you have deer in front of you, whether it's a feed station or whether it's a food plot. You bust deer out of there. Like we said, can a buck still come through tomorrow? Yes, he can. But if I'm educating those does, anybody listening to this podcast who's hunted any amount of time, you educate a mature doe, she's not coming back. She's not stupid once a year. A buck is, she's not. So you're going to maybe push her farther back into the brush or into the woods or nearby cover to where that buck activity is still happening. You're just not going to see it.
So last thing I think we need to summarize this whole podcast with about, tackling bucks during the rut, especially during this time of the year right now, like as you were listening to this, as people are listening to this, is that earlier you had mentioned that you're going to cater a lot of this towards public land hunters and people who just have a little bit more land to play around with. Mm-hmm. So I think there are some good useful tips out there for people with 3 acres, 5 acres, like literally one stand, because you're saying if you have one stand, forget about it. But I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, well,
I should preface it. I didn't mean it.
I know you would want to chime in on that and add more to that. But where I think that a hunter on a small property could, and you can definitely speak better on this than I could, but could actually improve their hunting during this time of the year, is actually understanding how the bucks are passing through there, because their 1 acre or 2 acres is the travel corridor.
That's a great point. Great point, Ian. So I'm sorry, I moved my mic here. I'm going to bring it back. I needed to backtrack to, if you have one spot, that's not a bad thing. If you have a small property, which I've seen increasingly prevalent among hunters today, you have, like you said, 3 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres. Let's just say anything less than 30 acres. And we see it all in all sizes in between. And you think you can't intercept a buck right now, you're wrong. What I would suggest, this tactic, hunt as long as you can during the day, and do not dismiss the notion that you're going to have a deer come through at the middle of the day, because it happens a lot more than you think. And even if you don't have it on camera, they're coming through there. They're looking for does, and if you've got a small property and you're hunting it, I can guarantee you've got does on it, because you wouldn't be hunting it otherwise, because you're seeing deer. And the biggest bit of advice I can give you, and this is for any rut hunter, but especially a small property hunter, you have to be ready always. No sleeping, no playing on your phone. I would highly recommend against having your bow or crossbow hung up in a tree on a hook. Have that in your lap ready to go, because it happens like that. You've got 3 seconds. That buck is cruising. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and you look up, and here he comes. It's go time. It's Romeo Dobbs running across the middle, and you've got 1 second to hit him in stride. It's a Packer reference for all you football fans. You've got to be ready. You have to be ready, and that's one thing one bit of advice I would give you is hunt and be alert and be ready if you're hunting a small property. But that is key. I've known so many guys. We've actually seen it this year. So many guys who have this little property. You shot that off of that? Have you ever seen that buck before? No, never saw him before. It's a magical time.
They just get lucky. It just happens to be that time that buck chose to go that way.
Well, they got lucky because the deer showed up.
Right.
But they made the shot, and they were smart enough to be out there. So I'm tipping.
And be alert and be ready.
They're hunters. I'm tipping my hat to those guys and gals that hunt like that, because we know it can happen. And another football reference is if you're a defensive back, you have to have a short memory. Because if you have a small property, like me, I've hunted it 16 times. I hang my head. I'm like, yeah, there's no deer around here. I'm not going to see anything. It sucks. And then lo and behold, I let my buddy go out there and hunt, and he kills something. And it's like, that's because he didn't have all this stuff in his head of all the 16 other sits where he didn't see squat, and the neighbor's dog wouldn't shut up, and then somebody across the street fired up their lawnmower at 5:30. You put that all in your head, and it feeds on you. But a short memory and being ready this time of year, no matter where you hunt, you can have success just like anybody else. Are you going to kill a 160-inch buck like Noah did? I don't know, probably not. But can you kill a nice, respectable one that I would be proud to put in my truck? Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and also just pay attention. Same goes for the same advice that we gave everyone before. Even the smaller landowners, entry and exits is still super important.
That's even more important on a small property. If you haven't done it, go out at noon today or tomorrow with a leaf blower or a lawnmower and clear that walking trail to your spot. If you're, like I said, if you're hunting in your backyard or something like that, you don't try to do that on public land. But some guys do. They take a leaf blower, but you got to be quiet. If you're hunting a small property, you have to get in there. You're walking on eggshells. Get in there, be quiet, and don't bust anything on the way in or out. Big public land properties, that's just a matter of sometimes just going out of your way. Crossing a stream, I've waded streams, creeks, whatever, to circumvent areas where I knew deer might have been, and I might have busted them. There's all sorts of tactics that you can do. Go on our website, deeranddeerhunting.com. look at my Whitetail Wisdom blog. If you scroll through there, you're going to see all sorts of blogs I've written on this topic.
Also, just scroll through the plethora of YouTube videos that we have.
Oh my gosh.
Talking about public land hunting. I mean, John, we got the Public Land Hunter series with John Eberhart.
That's the best series, I think. It's called Public and Pressured Land Deer Hunter with John Eberhart.
Yep.
It's on the Deer and Deer Hunting YouTube page. Some of the best advice. He's, in my opinion, like the best bow hunter in America. He has been for 50 years. His record book bucks speak to that. But those tips are invaluable on how to hunt public land. The public land guys, what's their name?
The Hunting Public.
They're great. Yeah. Those guys are good. They're young guys. They're excellent too.
Great message.
Great messages. But there's enough information out there for you guys now that this shouldn't be as mysterious as it was when I was a kid, to help you become a better deer hunter. So is that what we got for today?
I think so. I think
all
that
right.
covers
Well,
it, yeah.
Thank you everyone for listening to the Deer Talk Now podcast. It was number 82. 82. And you can listen to all of them right here on wherever you're listening to the podcast, or you can watch them on our Facebook page, Instagram, and the YouTube page we just mentioned. For Ian Sanchez, I am Daniel Schmidt. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next week again for another episode of the Deer Talk Now podcast. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by 10-Point Crossbow Technologies. Whether I'm in a tree stand, ground blind, or spot and stalk hunting, I know the Nitro 505 is up to any challenge. Check one out at a dealer near you or log on to 10pointcrossbows.com for more information.